Alrighty, hello everyone. We are live again on Periscope for another version of Ace Marks the Spot. I'm joined again by Noops. This is becoming a little bit of a habit having you on here, but thank you very much for joining me whilst I think a little bit distracted perhaps by the Philadelphia 76ers game that's going on in the background. Is that right?
They're winning. They're
They're
winning.
winning.
It's. I didn't think they would do that, but they're winning. And not only are they winning, they're beating our good friend Spreads Sacramento Kings.
Oh, well, that's the main thing.
It really, that's what's most important is beating Spread, and that's really the reason I'm here. But thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I think we have a lot of great conversations. I think today's conversation, especially, is going to be, kind of the way I described it earlier, is kind of going to be a balloon, and I think we can inflate it and make it as big as we want, and have a lot of space to kind of move around. So. I think this is going to be a really interesting, wide, and deep conversation and fun for everybody, and maybe a little different than what we normally do.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the previous content we've done is a lot around previewing or reviewing tennis that has been, out and about on the tour. But I think this is probably something that has been brewing for some time, I guess, in terms of what we see out in the media landscape from a gambling or a betting perspective. I think it's a really important topic that probably isn't addressed in as much detail as it could. And I guess to get straight into it, I'll just pop. We've got some little bits and pieces we can go with on our screen here, but we did ask the question earlier on Twitter: is that what is the one thing you've had to learn the hard way on your betting journey? I guess it is a very open question, and it's hard to kind of summarize it down into a particular sentence or two, and we'll do our best as we kind of go through. But I think we'll get stuck into, I guess, one of the key issues that's come up in the last couple of days, and it's been a story that's been in and out of the news, more so on Twitter and from particular websites. I'll just pop it up on the screen here for us. News around Parlay Patz, who I think rose to an element of fame, would you say, a couple of months ago with a couple of parlay, or for Australian term, multi-bet wins in quick succession, and that drew the attention of some particular companies in the United States, who I guess it's trying to find that balance of, did they perhaps over advertise and glorify what he was potentially doing instead of reporting it for what it was, and giving those involved, I guess, the wide picture of the entire story. What are your thoughts, and I guess, on what you've seen over the last couple of days with what's come out, and perhaps maybe what you may have thought about when that story first came out?
It's a really interesting story because I think at the surface it may sound kind of simple, but the more time that I've spent thinking about it, reading about it, and the more time that you and I have spent talking about it, what we've realized is it's a perfect example of a lot of problems that exist in kind of the industry and the world that we live in. The sports betting industry, the sports betting world, gambling, Twitter, if you will, whatever word you want to use to describe the group of people that are actively out there betting every day, trying to share their tips with people, create content, engage in that situation. There's a lot of perils to that, and both you and I have lived through that and understand that a little bit. And this story is just kind of this almost beautifully messy combination of all that stuff. Again, the more I read it, the more I'm fascinated by it, and the more I kind of combine and put with it. And I think what we're going to talk about over the next hour or so is going to really cover a lot of interesting things. I mean, my initial thoughts are, as we start to look at this, maybe to summarize a little bit for the people that haven't read the story, a gentleman named Parlay Patz apparently started with $500 and turned it into a whole lot of money. I can't remember exactly how much, but I think it was pretty close to $1 million. Just by putting parlays together, and that's kind of the story. And sort of towards the end of that now he's becoming famous for attacking athletes, for using social media for really the worst possible way you can use it. So I think that kind of summarizes, the big takeaways for me in kind of a high level. How about you? Is that anything else you want to add? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you've kind of covered the main parts there. I think when this story first came out, when he went on that run, and what we might do is talk um, just to a slide that you did put up, that you've been able to put up for us talking today. That some of these bets that he did put on across his run, it was quite glorified, and that there are ways around, and that was reported in little bylines and taglines that it's not the best way to go about betting in the long term. But it's one of those ones that if you put that comment at the end, then why are we putting the whole article together in the first place and glorifying it at the same time? I think it raises obviously a lot of questions, and when you look at the implied probability of these all within a short space of time, it's a really tricky area, because it does, and it's not just this particular example. I can use examples in Australia of companies posting on their social media big bets that have been placed and taken, and it's a way of kind of drawing people into the conversation. But there isn't that, I guess, not necessarily a disclaimer, but that conversation that what can happen with these, when people who are new to the area see these kind of things, it brings about this expectation that that this is something that is achievable for anyone who has a go. And for us who have been around for a longer period of time, you can look at it and you can go, well, actually, if this were the case, and everyone could do this, that they wouldn't be betting. There's no
Right.
feasible way.
It's I think the first thing we kind of wanted to talk about was the the bigness of this story and the way it's kind of built up, and how scary that is. I'm in a state in the United States, Pennsylvania, where legal betting is very new, and there's constantly new books opening all the time. And one of the ones we have is FanDuel. And when I go on FanDuel every day, there's a banner right up at the top there, and it says so and so bet $50 and won $1,000, or bet $10 and won $800, and so on and so forth. And I always look at those, and they make me kind of sick, because what I think and what I know is, me, when I started to bet, when I started to do that, seeing something like, go be like, well, I could do that. If any random person can do that, like it's not just luck. Like there must be some sort of skill in there. I'm smart enough to do something like that. And then you start to look at this story, and the first part of it being that, for me, again, the first troubling part being that his performance is really sensationalized, and it's the performance not in total, it's the performance of these 10 bets. When you read all these articles and you go through everything on ESPN, the Action Network, everywhere else that this kind of floated around, you see this chart and you see these 10 bets. And, for starters, it's only 10 bets. And as you know, as I know, as a lot of people know, that is an insanely tiny sample size. And then,
Yep.
like you said, you start to look at the implied probabilities. So that first parlay he put in, and this is based off market pricing, so it's not, necessarily the true implied probability. He's placing a bet that needs to win more than 2% of the time. That's the way it's priced. Now, if he has an edge, maybe it's a 5% bet, maybe it's a 6% bet. Again, let's pretend that he's a really sharp guy and he picked 13 teams that all had an edge for some reason and put them together, and maybe it was 5% instead of 2. And then he went again to the next one, put 15 teams together that maybe had like 3% instead of 0.75, and so on and so forth. It's unbelievable. I mean, when I put together all these probabilities, Ace, the probability of all these things happening is 0.000001%. That's
Yep.
5 zeros. 5.
Right.
I mean, it's just infinitesimally tiny, and to applaud this, to celebrate it. When you read these articles, they talk about his lifestyle and his cars and the hotels he stays in and his private chefs. And to his credit, actually, when you read a lot of the quotes in here, he doesn't build a lot of those things up. I think that he's answering questions that are asked of him.
Yep.
Now, later on, we're going to get to some frankly deplorable things that he's done. But from the very myopic sense of exactly placing these bets and kind of being in those articles, I don't necessarily blame him, but you look at the coverage again, it's just this sensationalization, like, wow, look at this guy who did this thing, it must be great. And the only reason, they want to do that is because it gets clicks, it gets people that are interested. I mean, if I sent you an article, Ace, that said, so-and-so turned $100 into $1 million, you click on it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. It's that appeal that, it's trying to find that balance of what will generate clicks for people for websites and their business, and what is actually morally responsible in the climate in an area that is continuing to evolve at a pretty rapid rate. And I guess that's, from my perspective, from an Australian standpoint, looking over at the US and what's been able to kind of evolve over the last couple of years. I think it's a really important area. And I think anyone who has been through and in the business for a long period of time could see where this story was going to end up to an extent. I didn't think it was going to end up this badly. I thought he was just going to fade kind of off into obscurity somewhere, maybe on a jet or whatever he wants to do. But
Right.
I think this is the perfect case, and I'll just grab up. I didn't want to go and talk through too much about the articles and how much it was glorified by particular people in the media, but there was one particular comment here that from the Action Network, and I've just grabbed it off their website, and I'll pop all the links up after this Periscope as well. They said the opportunity to be in this situation is insane to me, which is what Patz told the Action Network. So he signed up on October 9th with William Hill and deposited $500. So what you're looking at here is someone who, looking at that in the absolute first instance, was betting a maximum of $500, you would say in this instance, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's on, October 9th. Then if we were to flip back and have a bit more of a look at, some of those things that he was putting on within a month, you've got bets where he's risking, up to $42,000 after starting with that starting point. I think.
Yep, in less than 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really big concern, I guess, in terms of what we're putting out there as an overall community. And I think that that's something that involves us as well. I'm not trying to push it onto particular people, but as some of the comments here, and so Drew Whale Cup, it does encourage problem gambling because it glorifies these wins as something that happens that can happen quite regularly. And although they did put in some of the articles that he did lose $300,000 over that time frame, they didn't harp in on that. They didn't focus on that. It was just a comment to kind of cover themselves in that instance, to then go, well, that's right, we've spoken about that. Let's see what we can do and how we can word this story to get as many clicks as possible.
Yeah, it's something that you see in the aftermath and kind of the last couple paragraphs. When you look at the headlines, when you look at the graphics in the story, it really pops and really catches people. And again, it's just like Drew said. The big deal is it encourages problem gambling. Looking at the other compliment here, comment. I'm sorry. What's the difference between this and glorifying lifetime losing poker players? Nothing. This is just another version of that. I mean, this is the same thing as an ad on TV for the lottery. It's designed to grab people's attention and to make them think that, oh, well, all I have to do is take $500, put it in this account, and I might get rich. And no matter where you are in life, always remember that $500 is a different amount of money to a lot of people. And if even one person sees this and doesn't actually have $500 to possibly lose on some sort of crazy scheme like this, that one person could potentially ruin their life or mess it up for a significant period of time as a result of this. It's Again, it's the sensationalization of it. It's celebrating this like it's something that's plausible, that it's something that you can do. It's not like this is on like Ripley's Believe It or Not. I mean, this is on ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports. Hypothetically, a news station, effectively, if you will, that reports on facts in sports. It carries so much weight, and it's just really, really messy. Look at here. I'm just learning this guy's name. I'm not familiar with the story. The best way to read up, again, just I would imagine go into Google News and search Parlay Patz, Patz. I'm sure you'll see a bunch of stuff, and everything will kind of go up. And looking at King Kyrgios, it doesn't surprise him, and it doesn't surprise me either. And that's something we're going to talk about a little bit more. And I think that's actually even really the important point of this, that this is a great example of what a lot of betting media is. I mean, again, I was talking about, I go into FanDuel and I see all that stuff at the top. Most betting stories from a media perspective are so-and-so made this bet for $300,000 to win this amount of money, or somebody put $500 and won 50 grand or something like that. That's what you see. And it's delusional. I think it creates a false sense of hope in people's mind.
Yeah, I completely agree. And obviously, this is a very big story that is now on an international level, and there are a lot of layers to it, and there's a lot to unpack from it. And I guess, there's the first level of obviously bankroll management and what's involved in that. If there were to be bankroll management in the first place, then we wouldn't have this story, and none of this would have eventuated. There's a layer further to that then that we're looking at. Part of why he's come back into the news now is it's the transmission of threats of physical violence directed at professional and even college athletes. So it's not just people who are, I mean, it's not something that should be done for anyone at any level, but we're talking about college athletes as well who, are playing in a lot of instances for the love of the game and to try and further their career. I mean, I could only imagine what these players feel when they come off the court after, losing a match and open up their Instagram or open up things to, I think one of his threats was that he was going to, slit someone's throat with a blunt knife, for example. It's beyond. I used to think it was beyond belief, and now it's just. I think the way that social media and things are evolving, it becomes a really slippery slope when things get out of control and then aren't. We don't have regulations and rules, and I think this is obviously a really great step for players at all levels, that this is actually reaching the point where he could face up to 5 years in a federal prison. But it's a really ugly situation overall.
Yeah, and then maybe we'll put a pin in that and circle back to that later, because I know one of the other things we wanted to add on to this was, not just that it's problematic, but we wanted to circle back again, kind of that question of the day of, what are the lessons that we've learned and kind of had to pay to learn, because like anything in your life, you have to pay to learn anything, whether it be money, whether it be time, whether it be effort, whether it be failure. There's a certain toll to learning, and you and I have spent a lot of time, and so is a lot of people that are watching and listening have gone through a lot of that stuff. And you listen to this, and again, like all the problems that we talked about from a media perspective, there's a lot of great lessons here, in terms of what you can see and what you can look at, and kind of notice. And like that table, like we were talking about, again, you look at it, there's a lot of positives there, but you start to think about it. Again, it's only 10 bets. The implied probabilities are very, very tiny. Again, and you start to put some of that stuff together. So, I know one of the things that you do, and one of the reasons you're so popular and successful, and one of the things that I love that you do, is that you do have a service where you build previews and send picks out to people, and you do charge for it. And I know that the concept of touting is something that, for a lot of people has positives and a lot of people has negatives. And I thought maybe we could get into a little conversation around that.
Yep.
And maybe before we jump into that, just, when you're looking in your experience, looking at Twitter, again, you're someone who's great at networking, you talk to a lot of people. What do you look for positively? What do you look for negatively? What are kind of your red flags? And then maybe we'll get into that bigger discussion of, trusting people with your money.
Yeah, and I guess again, there's a lot to the topic, and while we do talk through it, if anyone does have anything that they've learnt along the way, who is listening along now or watching this back on a replay, do let us know, because I don't think this will be the first time we talk about. This will be the first time, but it won't be the last time that we talk about this kind of topic. So if you do have any comments or things you want to share, get involved. That's why we do these things and we come on live. So if you do want to talk or ask questions, by all means, feel free to jump on. I think, having been on the social media over probably the last 7 or 8 years, things have changed, particularly over probably the last 2, 3, 4 years. And I think that's obviously changed with how rules and regulations have evolved in particular countries as well. I personally obviously started by just writing previews for a friend's website, and things kind of evolved and took off from there. But even up until 2015, 2016, there were still times where I would just post selections. So like, so-and-so, player A to beat player B, 3 units. And I found that those were the types of plays that if they were to lose, that I found the most negative reaction to them. So I decided myself that in everything that I was going to do, that I would no longer put out a selection without my preview and justification that comes with it. Whether that means anything to the people who subscribe and read it, I don't know. But personally, from my perspective, I needed to feel like I was providing that justification and that information as to why I was selecting what I was selecting. I think it's a very difficult place that as things are evolving, and there are a lot of people out there promoting a lot of things, we can't stop people posting, that they've won 17,000 units over the last 42 days and to sign up to a subscription service. I mean, there's some things that you learn along the way in terms of paying for particular content and paying for, I'm talking more so on just the tennis level, but the wider betting community level as well, that there's been a number of instances over the last couple of years where people have kind of come and gone. And it's been, you see those who kind of burn the brightest, but they also burn out very, very quickly. And I think that's a really important thing is look for that slow burn and look for that consistency across, delivering selections, I guess is something that I've kind of come to learn. And I found when I made that switch from everything being free to having that element and having that subscription element, it wasn't something I wanted to do, but it was the only way that I felt like I could regulate the situation that I was in at that time in terms of having responses and having that kind of, so my selections at the moment cost 10 to 15 Australian dollars per month, which is quite low in comparison to a lot. It's a cup of coffee or two, for someone who's American who is looking to sign up. But it's almost like that token of respect that comes with that. I think there are a lot of instances in, particularly in tennis on Twitter, in the past that people have come along and, advertised all these things and then disappeared off into the abyss. And, you've sent them $50 or you've sent them $100 and you've sent it through their PayPal account through friends and family where you can't go through your dispute resolution to be able to get your money back. That money is disappeared and it's as if you've sent it to a family member. There are so many red flags that come up. And, I think that this story of Parlay Patz brings out so many different layers to it that, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And, we can talk about it a little bit and start to scrape the surface, but it's just a massive topic.
There's a lot of things that you said there, and two things I really want to highlight. Number one, if you're looking for someone to help you out with gambling, that's fine. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, at the end of the day, for a lot of people, this is entertainment, and that's fine to pay a service for your entertainment. But what I would say is look for someone that's doing more than just sending you picks. That's providing logic, that's providing content, that's providing something that helps you grow a little bit in your understanding. It's really hard just to look at a list of picks every day and to really understand the logic behind it and to learn and to grow and to put all that stuff together. And then you start to look at some of the fee-based structures. Like you said, you want to avoid somebody that's asking for a lot of money up front. It's the internet. They're strangers. Don't give strangers on the internet your money, especially a lot of money. It's funny. It's this really simple thing, and I know that I say it. I've done it. I've sent a couple people on Twitter that now I'm embarrassed. I won't say their names, not to give them any credit, and frankly, it would make me blush. But I've sent money to some of the stupider people on the internet because that's what you do. You get on and you're looking around. And you're like, ooh, so and so. Look at all these picks. Oh, he's 10 and 0 in his last 10 bets. Oh my God! Well, let me sign up for this. I'll be rich. Blah blah blah. Of course, I'll send you $50. I'm only betting $20 a game, but if I go 10 and 0, I'll get that $50 back real quick. That's so stupid. It's just you got to be careful with that stuff. And again, it's that short record. King Curios was talking about somebody bragging about every winner and ignoring all the losers. You got to have somebody that has a meticulous log that's taken care, that's looking through their record and stuff. And I know that you're pretty good about that. And again, you go back and circling back to the story we're talking about, we've just got that list of 10 bets with no idea what else that he bet on. And there was a lot of people at the time that when they were talking about this, it was considered problem gambling, and a lot of that was ignored by people in these stories. People that were interviewed came out of their Twitter feeds and other places and talked about it as being problematic. And it's just a shame. And again, you look at this list of bets. I mean, this is classic stupid Twitter tout stuff. You'll see somebody post something like this, and it's like, I'm 10-0 in my last 10 bets. Look at this. Oh my God, I started with $1,800 and now it's $1,000,000. Look at that. All you had to do was follow me. Of course, you should pay me $100 a week for my picks. Look how much money you'll make. And again, it's outrageous. You look at, again, the implied probabilities of some of these wagers. You put it together, it's just, it's so problematic and it's so troublesome. Again, you start with the idea that somebody sees this and thinks, oh, maybe I can do this. And then they put $500 in an account and they start to bet and bet and bet and they lose it all. And then they go onto Twitter or Instagram or Telegram or somewhere else, and they find somebody and they go, oh, well, I'll just pay so-and-so for these picks and I'll get my $500 back. Oh, it's just $100 for the week. All right, so I send him $100 for the week and then I bet $100 a game, da-da-da-da-da. Sure, that should be fine. I'll get all my money back at the end of the week. But then you paid somebody $100 a week and you lose on all the picks. And now you've got another $500 you're down and you're just constantly chasing and chasing to get into that hole. And you haven't learned anything because all you did was read some article and go online and find somebody that's just sending you picks for a charge. It's, if you're going to spend money, if you're going to pay for this, make sure you're at least learning something along the way.
Yeah, and when you look at, that all this information came from that article, so it's all been sourced from Action Network. The comment and the quote to pull people into reading it was 50 days, $1.1 million in winnings, and one wild ride, a day inside the Parlay Patz phenomenon. So after all this had happened, and we just need to be clear that, obviously there's been a lot of negativity towards those who advertised this in the first place, and helped kind of add gas to the fire here. All these things that Parlay Patz has been accused of now that will go in front of the federal, that you could end up in prison for, actually occurred before all this happened. So, and that is being said by those who I guess were involved initially. But that being said, it's still, I don't think that makes it any better. You're still glorifying something that is a really major issue, to the point where I think they even may have, and don't quote me on this, but may have even followed him around like with this for a 24-hour period wherever he went, as if it's some sort of,
Oh yeah, you look at the articles.
Circus. Yeah,
there's multiple articles. They had a first one. They updated it after a while, and you look at them like so. I'm looking here. There's 3 articles specifically. The one that we quoted, has a lot of stuff in there, but there's one before it. It's like $619,000 in 3 weeks, and the way you read it, it's almost the exact same article as the next one, 50 days, $1 million. I think that they almost wrote the first one knowing that this might actually be the end. Like it's a lot of the same comments, a lot of the same stats, but I think you're right. They kind of followed him around, saw how long it went, and then things maybe got a little bit rough, and it's a farce. I mean, they're selling something that's not that it'll never happen again. I'm sure it will happen again. I'm sure someone will get this lucky, but one human being on planet Earth every 50 years. I'm not that good at math, but God, it's certainly probably not going to happen to you. And God forbid you're too stupid to know that.
Yeah, and I think with, like what you said before, what was it? 0.00000 5% chance of that happening. You look at people who win, $1 million in the lottery. They get an article, maybe that they won $1 million and that they quit their job and they're going to go on a holiday, but we don't hear about them again. What's different here? And when you look at it from a longer term perspective, you look at, a 13-team parlay and a 15-team parlay. Like it's
a lottery ticket. That's the best example.
Yeah. It's a really, really difficult area in a position that, and in a market that is evolving quicker than probably anyone really thought it might. It gets really, really dangerous. We might just quickly go see if there's any questions that have popped up just from this initial bit. And there's a few people who had some questions about the story. Basically, as you said before, Noobs, if you just Google Parlay Patz, Parlay, and then Patz, you'll see most of the stuff that's come. So basically, he went on this run in, it was October, November, December last year. and it was quite glorified to the point where there are a lot of people defending his ways and suggesting that those who were negative towards the story, well, why don't you just copy him and win the same amount of money? That has obviously since evolved, and now we're only 4 months further down the track, and he's facing potentially 5 years in a federal prison as a result of some comments that he's made towards players on both college teams, so college, I think it was basketball and football teams, but also NFL players and fairly high profile people. We can assume from the initials and what they've been able to put out, I guess, in terms of explaining the case at the moment. So yeah, it's a really tough one, but if you have learnt anything the hard way along the way, pop it in the comment section and we can talk about it a little bit. We had a few comments here, and thanks to King Kyrios before, as well as Whale Kappa, who did mention that it does encourage problem gambling, and it isn't something that we should be highlighting in such a way that we did, or it has been over the not just this story, but I can imagine it's going to evolve, and we're going to see these same stories in all sorts of sports in all sorts of different parts of the world. And this is happening in a lot of areas that not necessarily the big win at the start, but more the responses and the attacking of players that we see both publicly. I guess you can see it on Twitter just by people who may tag in a particular player that they may have lost a bet on, but also you can only imagine then what's been said publicly, privately as well, through direct messaging on particular apps. And it's probably tricky for a lot of these players that they're trying to the way things are now, that they need an Instagram and they need ways to be able to kind of promote themselves, but there is obviously this drawback that you open yourselves up to a lot of negative content coming your way.
Yeah, it's so I think to talk about kind of the next thing, again, the other part of what's problematic about this is you create this scenario again where people are going to chase it and go after what's happening here, and then what do? They've lost all this money. They're angry now. You're upset. You're on social media. There's nothing worse than internet courage. There's a lot of amazing things about the internet. I love it. It's without a doubt one of, if not my most favorite things. But internet courage is something that allows trolls to do what they do. That allows people to go on and just spew hatred. And that's the way I think about it. Like, and I picture it too. I picture it in my head that way. I just see this evil person just literally spewing, like almost like vomit flying out of their mouth, just this horrible negativity. And that's what people do. And that's what's happened here. So not only has, this person who's essentially hit the lottery been glorified and carried it around like some sort of thing that's possible to do. On top of that, and like I said, no shame to him for that. That's not his fault. What is his fault is what he's now being accused of. And amazingly enough, honestly, I didn't know you could get put in jail for this. Like, cool. That's kind of cool. I didn't realize you could get sent to jail for sending horrible things to people on Twitter. And you went through some of it before. Do you have kind of the whole list up there in front of you? I know that you organized some of those quotes. I can't remember if you had a picture for that or not.
Let me just grab through. So let me just take a bit of a look here. Just while I am finding that, there was another comment, I think, that from the one away there, Noops, that is also from your neck of the woods about the FanDuel info commercials that are up at the moment that can be quite encouraging. Is that something that's come up quite recently, or is that something?
No, that's been essentially the entire way it's been advertised since the beginning. It's been really sad to watch some of these commercials. There is one literally where they have an Abraham Lincoln head and a George Washington head, like they cut out of like the $1 and $5 bill, and they're talking to each other about like, oh, what are you doing? What do you think? And like, oh, while you were waiting, I was winning because I placed this bet on blah 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 blah. And it's just thing after thing after thing like that. There is a Betfair casino ad, and I think this is for Jersey, not PA. But this guy's literally like, I don't know. I was sitting at home and I was bored and I put $20 in my account and I finished with 15 grand. And it's you like, what the hell? Like even if that actually happened to him, like and
Yeah.
you look at it, he looks like an actor. You have no idea if that actually happened to the person that's on screen, but it's you're just enticing people to make these bad decisions. Everybody's going to like open their account and put $20 in there, and they'll do it again and again and again and again. And that's what it is. I mean, it's not the first time; it's the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and you just keep chasing and chasing. Instead of putting
Yep.
20 in, you put 40. Instead of putting 40 in, you put 80. And instead of putting 80 in, you put 160. Instead of 160, it's 320. And now we're starting to get to some scary numbers. And you're chasing and
Yep.
you're chasing and you're chasing, and it encourages that behavior, not necessarily, not explicitly, but it encourages it by making it seem like these improbable feats are possible. Because you've
Exactly.
heard about it. Not to admonish the general public, but in general, the public is terrible at math. Um, any number above zero is a possibility. Again, it could be 0.000001, but it's above zero, so it could happen, Ace. It could happen,
Yep.
Steve. It could be a
Hmm.
thing. It could be real. So let me go out there and see if I can do it too.
Yep. And I think that misunderstanding with that probability and what is meant to happen leads to the responses. I mean, I'd like to think that as a society that the first instinct isn't to go and shower abuse at people privately through their direct messages or things that we've seen. I could be wrong on that, but I think that unrealistic expectation of people winning or people putting a lot of money on things and that outcome not occurring can lead to the abuse and the targeted nature of, I guess, people who, as you said before, internet courage. It's a lot easier to send it to someone. I can send a message to so and so in, you know, Mexico
Right.
at the moment who just lost their tennis match, and I can go, well, I, just lost this, and this, and make all the threats you want. And I guess that leads to a couple of examples that we've seen over the last couple of years, and we'll kind of put this little category as, so you've just lost a bet, what not to do. Um, a great example of this came up earlier this week. So Vera Lapko, who is a women's tennis player who hasn't been on tour for a while. I think she may have been off with a fairly significant injury, and she
It's been a while
hasn't
since we saw her, several
hasn't
months.
played. Yeah, and to the point where probably a couple of weeks ago I was wondering where she'd actually got to. Anyway, she came back and played a match earlier this week and lost that match. Obviously, then Vera, already probably disappointed in herself that she did lose. She wasn't expected to win the match. She was quite a big underdog in the match. I think it might have been against Georgie or whoever it was. It doesn't matter. She lost. This is what she was then subjected to on her Instagram, and she was actually one of the few who would then put this up onto her social media so people can see kind of what we're dealing with. Now, I've had to blank out a number of words within this, but you can get the point, I think, from here. That the last comment in itself, I honestly hope you die and get caught for match fixing, you pathetic bleep. This is only one of many examples I can think about seeing, and they're only the ones we hear about again. And I guess we keep coming back to that there are particular players that, I'm sure all players receive this to an extent. The fact that you can jump on and go, you know what, I'm going to send these things, it's just easier to be negative. It's kind of encapsulates a lot of, society and where we're at the moment, that if you go to a restaurant and you're not happy with your food, you're probably more inclined to write a bad review about something than you are a positive review. You're like, that was a really great time, because when it's negative, you just want to kind of, what, I'm going to show them, I'm going to type this, and this is going to, I'm going to feel so much better about this by telling the world that I lost too much money betting on Vera Lapko on her first match back after an extended layoff.
And again, there's a lot to unpack here, and I think this is something that hopefully you and I can talk about more, because it exists. It doesn't just exist; it persists. It seems to happen more and more, and maybe players are being more comfortable coming out and talking about it and being open about it. But you just read this, and you have to, and you look at it and you think about the language. I mean, what kind of mental state was this person in? to send this to another human being, to threaten to kill them. It's just, and again, this I don't think this exists without the internet. You've got that internet courage angle, but just that moment. I mean, good Lord, it's come on, people. Like, and this is again, maybe to circle back to exactly what I said. Think about that person in that moment. I mean,
Mm.
how much money could they have lost? How much stress could they have in their life to be at this moment and to do something like this? And I can only hope that this is the low point in this person's life, that they got together whatever problems they have, gambling wise, life wise, other, and we're able to get to a more positive place, because it's horrendous. I mean, this is horrific to do this to anybody, not just a professional athlete. I mean, to send this to another human being, to send something like this, to force someone to read that and to think that even for a second that they might be in danger, is just deplorable. And again, you go through stuff like this, and you look again at it's gross. And I know you have some more examples of it too, because it's pervasive. It really is.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we can go back to the Australian Open in 2018. So over 2 years ago, there's a report that the comment, we all get death threats after every match, and they've just had to accept that that is the new norm for what they are dealing with on a professional level. That Heather Watson, I think, was the one who spoke out in this particular report, but then there was also one from CNN, that someone told Nicole Gibbs that they hope that she dies slowly. Like it's and these things, I guess, have been brought up and highlighted on those particular occasions, but again, like nothing's really being done about it.
It's and I think maybe it's because they haven't talked about it a lot. I think maybe the attitude for a lot of these players are, well, I make a lot of money and I'm just kind of supposed to deal with this. And I'm glad that more players are coming out and talking about it, because it's terrible. It's just terrible. It's terrible that somebody could be in such a position to say something like this. Again, it's terrible that someone would have to read something like this, and it builds upon itself. As people, just like the article about Parlay Patz, where people see that and then want to go in and parlay. People are going to see stuff like this now and react the same way. So we have to work to fight this kind of stuff and try to be reasonable. And I think, again, one of the easiest ways to do it is, the easiest thing to say is not do something, but, you relieve some of the pressures around it. And a lot of the stuff that drives this does seem to be betting related, and it seems to be problem betting related. So again, circling back to that story, you have somebody that's doing gambling that we're advertising, that we're celebrating, that's doing problem gambling. And that now
Mm-hmm.
spreads that poison into the world, and you have other people doing it, and then those people continue to take that anger and spread it out and infect tennis players, infect professional athletes, and to threaten other human beings. Again, you read some of this stuff, it's brutal. I can't
Yep.
imagine saying this to somebody, let alone sending it to them in some permanent way that they can read over and over and over again for the rest of their life. Like, oh my God.
And I think that's the thing, when you look at this situation, it's a terrible situation overall. But the positive out of it is that, we're actually seeing someone who is going to have to go before the court and could face up to 5 years in federal prison. Like, I think that if there's anything to come from this story that's a positive, is that this is although, as we said, that a lot of people saw that the ending to this was probably not going to be great, like this got ugly really quickly.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to that, to the losing. I think you only see this when you lose. And one of the other lessons that you and I have learned, and I want to talk about a comment we got actually outside of the chat, Sharky Waters Nation commented, I think knowing oneself and knowing that breaks are okay. There will be clients every single day who want action, who don't realize we don't have our best minds 365 days a year. When growing from the ground up, it seems counterintuitive to tell someone not today. Always you, the cap, or the first. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Not only that, the person you may be following doesn't necessarily have it every single day, but it's a
Yeah.
long process. There's losing.
Yeah.
Losing is part of this.
Yeah.
Professional, really awesome gamblers are right, 54 to 56% of the time, which means
Mm.
they're losing 45% of the time. So there's losses. Again, there is that, we talked about that payment of knowledge. You're going to lose almost just as much as you win. And you have to have that temperament. If you don't, you're going to, again, lash out. You're going to do stuff like send people horrible things on Twitter. God forbid that actually translates to your real life. You lash out to your friends, your family, people around you.
Yep.
God forbid, even abuse yourself. You go out something like something like that happens, and instead of sending some shit to somebody on social media, you go out and drink too much, get in your car and drive, or do something goofy like that. It's really problematic. There's a
Hmm.
lot of issues that grow out of this because it's winning, it's losing. So you've got that competitive aspect, and then you add money to it, and now you put in again kind of the gasoline to the fire that is the internet in a
Yeah.
way. You actually have access to all these people. It can be
Hmm.
really scary, and you've got to be careful.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing when we look at sporting players and you look at the biggest names, and a lot of when you look at how it's not the response to how they react when they win; it's the response to how they react when they lose. And I think that translates over to kind of everything that we see in social media as well. And I think that as we said, this is probably this is the first time that we've spoken about it, but it won't be the last. And it might be a case of us sitting here and going, like Sharky there on Twitter, getting people on and having conversations and going, how do you lose? What is it that, what is it that you look for? What other things? Because I mean, we see enough of the winning. People, there's enough masking of losses as there is amongst, not just social media, but in a lot of parts of life. It's more about going back the other way and going, what is it? When you lose, how do you handle that? What is it that you look for? You know, you may have lost for a couple of weeks in a row, a couple of months in a row. What is it that you're actually looking for to kind of right and steady the ship? And I think they're things that aren't really discussed. And I think these articles initially about Parlay Patz are a perfect example of that. You can get hundreds and hundreds of words and paragraphs describing, about the plane and the chef and all the exciting things that could happen. But there will be one sentence that will say, in this time he lost $300,000, and these bets are, maybe at the bottom, these bets aren't, the best way to approach it. Just to consider. I think it's just the way that a lot of these things, and I understand the need, and the clickbait need to get people to read your articles, and that's what's keeping some people in their jobs. But at some point, it's where is your moral compass pointing on a lot of
Yeah.
these situations when you're starting to glorify things that are just mathematically improbable?
And I think again, just to circle back to again the big question of lessons learned here, and maybe even the thesis, if you will, of kind of what we've talked about is be careful, be really, really careful. Spend a lot of time vetting the information you take in and read things. At first glance, a lot of this stuff sounds interesting. It sounds fun. It's very sensational, but read it a couple times. Look for things like short period spans, tiny sets of information, stuff that, again, you read a lot of these articles and most of it's about cars and personal chefs and flying in planes and stuff. Like, once you get halfway through an article and it seems like it's a rap video more than it is an informational article, turn it off. Move on to something else. Like, get out of there.
And that's the thing with this article, is that you then, if it already wasn't great value in terms of what he's doing, to then go out and spend that money on a car, which is then going to depreciate. I mean, when you're talking about value in terms of betting and value in life and what you're looking at, that what appreciates and depreciates, it's just a really, like, you could see it turning bad at some point. It was just a matter of when. And unfortunately for him, compared to some other people that we've probably seen over the journey, there is the potential that this is going to end in jail time.
Yeah, and it's funny because as excited as I am to learn that this is something you can actually be punished for in a real way, I'm almost kind of disappointed because I think that the best lesson that could come out of this was if there was some story about how Parlay Patz lost all of his money betting in a couple weeks. We find out he piles it all up, and then he had 4 parlays of some outrageous amount of money, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
That was the end of it. No more chefs, no more planes, but they probably wouldn't report on that.
No.
But instead, and that's what's interesting about stuff like this. It's you start to go through it and you read more about it, and it's amazing. You read about this guy and he's doing all this stuff and it's crazy and you expect it to fall apart kind of like that. Well, at some point he'll bet too much in that. No, but instead you find out he's doing this other awful thing, and it's again, and that's what we liked about this. And as sad as maybe this story I think makes you and I, we thought that this again was just this really sort of big and interesting story that covered a lot of this stuff. Again, problem gambling, problem media and coverage of gambling, problem behavior of people that are betting in a problematic way. Just a lot and a lot to unpack.
Yeah, and as we came back to around that bankroll management and how you can control your situation, as we said, you look at the risked stakes within this table of 10 selections, and the lowest one, the only ones that are four figures are the ones at the top there, and that's because the odds were 4,656 to 1 and 13,177 to 1. And then you look back to the story that came up, and part of the work on the Action Network was, he signed up with $500, and there's this kind of talk with, people who are trying to defend their stance in terms of how they were, blowing up this situation initially. It doesn't make it any better that he started with $500. It arguably makes it worse that, you've put that into this story when when we're in a position where we would like as much as we can to provide positive input into the space around what is considered responsible gambling at the end of the day. And it's difficult to then see some pretty big areas of the media perhaps not have that same level of I think it's a responsibility, and with what we've been able to do, it's the gambling space overall is continuing to evolve and expand, like we said before. But we need to kind of keep up with it from a responsibility standpoint to make sure that things don't get ugly really quickly. And it's, you look at gambling and you look at how it's glorified when you can consider that addiction around gambling can be quite, you can put it on a similar level to alcohol or other drugs, but we don't get the same glorifying nature with some of those particular things that we do in something that in this instance in the US is becoming legalized.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's why one of the things we wanted to talk about is this is only going to expand. There's only going to be more and more coverage like this. There's only going to be more and more advertisements like I described, and more people that are reaching into this and finding this content, and we want to talk about it because we want people to be careful. It's the oldest example in the book. Do you have to touch the stove to learn that it's hot, or could we tell you that it's hot and maybe you don't have to touch it? Based on what I know about this, based on my experience and all my friends, even the most successful ones, they all had to touch the stove. And I think on some level you do, but hopefully we can help you maybe, only touch it once.
And that's the thing that, the people who, in this instance, touch the stove beforehand, there should be enough people now to be able to trust that the stove is hot. But is it a nature of how social media is now that, and I'd hate to take a phrase used by your president and refer to fake news. Is it just the fact that nobody trusts anything anymore?
I think it is. I think that's what it is. Not that even that nobody trusts anything anymore. It's really hard to trust stuff. It takes a lot of work. I remember growing up in elementary school, and one of the things my teachers told me was if it was published, it was true. Because there must have been a fact checker or somebody, and if somebody published it and they spent the time to print it out and put it in a book, it's true. That's a really dangerous thought. That's really scary. Because anybody can write anything, and anybody will publish it. And it's up to you now. There's not as many fact checkers as there used to be. There couldn't be. I mean, there'd only be fact checkers. There'd be more fact checkers than there were anything. If we lived in a world where all the stuff that was published was true. So it's up to you. And it's a burden. It really is. And it's hard. And if you're not willing to do that work, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. So, again, like I said, we're trying to help you a little bit. And we hope that, again, I think about it, all the mistakes I made, all the people I blindly tailed, all the people I sent money to, and all the stupid shit I did when I found Twitter. And again, it was like, oh, look at all this stuff. I'm going to get rich just following random people on Twitter. It's a mess.
And I guess that there's and we talked a little bit before we came on. There's a couple of other stories that have come out in the last couple of months that perhaps haven't got the same allure and appeal because there wasn't the big publicized rise before the fall. So I guess I would just talk to a couple of these. So there's a story of a gentleman who basically stole nearly $10 million in a fraud scheme and then blew it on outrageous bets and high-end Las Vegas, and his high-end Las Vegas lifestyle. Actually, a little bit earlier in the article, if you think about what you need to do to kind of dupe people into doing these things, when he actually was trying to talk, I think, in court to the judge actually told him he had to come a lot closer to the microphone because he was so softly spoken and shy. But when you look at some of these stories, I know, have you had a little bit of a look at this one, and I guess your thoughts about this as an example of, I think it's that gambling, it's one of those chicken or the egg. Is it the gambling problem in the first place that's led them down this path?
I think it might be. Again, like you said, it's a kind of a chicken and egg situation. You don't really know, where this all starts from, and it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of it, again, it's anything in life that really is problematic is not about one single thing. It's about a combination of pressures that pile up and overwhelm you and force you into doing things that don't make any sense, that you would never do under a sound state of mind. And I think the gambling, specifically gambling, not betting too. I mean, there is a way that you can attack this in a systematic and profitable way, but really gambling, really going out there, throwing out money that you can't necessarily afford at things you don't
Mm-hmm.
understand and really know what you're doing, it really builds on itself because it's money. Say
Yep.
what you will about money, but you got to pay bills, you got to feed yourself, you got to pay rent, you got to be able to put the lights on it and run water in your house. And if you're using money to do stuff like that, to bet, to gamble, and you don't know what you're doing, it's all this stress. Now you don't have any money, you can't go do anything fun. You might be in a position where you're having trouble paying rent. Now you've got credit card bills running up. Now you're taking loans from places, and you have all this problem, all this stress, and it builds and it builds and it builds. I mean, you got to be really careful with this stuff. And that's what we're worried about. You look at this article; it sounds flashy, it sounds exciting, it's really enticing. Boy, doesn't it sound fun? Wouldn't you want to just do 10 bets over a few months and make $1 million? It sounds great. Let's all go do that.
Yep. And I think, and there's a comment that's coming through from the one away, that the biggest hook for them was 45 years ago winning the first $1,000. Wow, easy. And I think something that is, and this is personally as well, I think growing up, when I was going through that kind of 18, 19, 20, you're bombarded with a number of different bookmakers offering deposit bonuses. And all of a sudden, one person who may only be betting, $1 at a time, $2 at a time, has to place a, $100 free bet on something, and they win. You get that rush that's associated. You may have just been a $1 or $2 bettor, but you've just won $500, and you need to turn over that $500. All of a sudden, that rush that you were getting when you were winning $2 or $3 doesn't quite compute with what you're receiving, if you were to do that again, because I remember that time I won $1,000 or that time I won $700, and it doesn't, you don't get that same kind of perception and thought with it. And I think what Australia has done Australia does a lot of things very poorly, but something they've done in the gambling or betting space is that they've tried their best, and they're starting to really tighten in on actually not allowing those deposit bonuses and bonus bets for people who deposit. That's something that's developed, and I guess I see from the outside looking into the US, you see a lot of people putting up that you deposit $50, get $350 in free bets. You're taking away, I guess. And I guess when I started that, you put $1 on something, $2 on something, and you get that thrill back of winning $10, $15. But, if you were to put, a 200, some places were putting $500 free bets that you had to put on it, that they almost want you to win. So then you can lose and then lose more over that longer term. And it becomes a really slippery slope, because when, as an Australian, you go to, if I go to a football match, you could count or watching it on television, the number of ads that are associated with it that are trying to entice. It's like what we're talking about here with that Parlay Patz story, is that things get out of hand really quickly, and they get away with it by just kind of going gamble responsibly at the end really quickly.
Right.
And it's a tricky one.
Yeah, and it's not just Australia, so don't feel bad. I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Some of these commercials and these ads,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, so and so bet $10 and won 8,000. Oh, I was bored and sitting on my couch and bet $20 and won 20 grand, and then they go through all that stuff, and you're at the end. If you gamble responsibly, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Like it's so, and then it's scary. You got to be careful. You got to take this slow. There's some people that get lucky and do this, but it's not sustainable. Again, you have to remember that this is the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, and I think there's parts to it, and as I said, we'll talk about this more in future episodes. But what we are dealing with here is, I think, you look at how things are evolving naturally in terms of what's being legalized and what's possible, and you look at how easy it is now to place a bet online. You just need to grab your phone, or you don't have to drive down. You don't need to drive down to an outlet with physical. Like if you put $300 on something, for
You don't
example,
even have to use a card. Just use your PayPal. Send them right
yeah,
in.
you just PayPal straight in. There's a
Doesn't even
number
matter if you
there.
have the money. They'll take it out of your bank account tomorrow,
Yeah.
whether you have it or not.
Yeah, and you don't think about it. Whereas if you were to physically get out of your house, walk down the street, or drive down the street, physically hand over six $50 bills or $50 notes and go, here you go, here is $300. It's, if you compare to, 10, 15 years ago as to what was considered, what was able to be done in this space. I said, but when things aren't regulated, there is every chance that gambling is actually going to become the biggest issue for society, purely because of how things have evolved and how easy it is to now, part ways with your money in a world where things aren't advertised in a way that is probably morally appropriate, and that's because people want to make money. Businesses want to make money. That at the end of the day.
Exactly, and I think that's what you have to remember. Again, and not that it's impossible. It's you can make money doing this, and
Yeah.
it's really hard to make a lot of money, but it is possible to do this and not lose money. But it's really easy to do this and lose a lot of money, and that's exactly And I hate to use this example, but I always kind of like it. I mean, they didn't build Vegas casinos with winners, sending money to winning gamblers. They spent money on casinos. They built them with losers' money. It's everybody that read that Parlay Pat article that went in and paid and put in all those losing parlays is paying your $250 deposit bonus, is paying your one-time free wager of $500, is paying for your free vodka and soda while you sit and just hammer blackjack whether you win or lose. That's the whole deal, and you have to remember that when you're reading a lot of this stuff. And it's a shame because it's hard to find coverage of a lot of this stuff. There's so very few outlets that talk about this stuff honestly at a high level. There's a lot of great podcasts. Our buddy Whale was in here earlier. The Deep Dive podcast is one of our favorites. They talk about it in a very realistic and reasonable, logical approach. But look again, ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports, if you will, the number one news station for sports coverage, is going out here and talking about this stuff. And I can't believe they don't know what they're doing. And, it's not about shaming ESPN. I mean, I guess maybe it is actually. I don't know. But you got to be careful, guys, because this stuff is everywhere. And talk to people. You got friends that are betting and you hear that they read this article and they're like throwing parlays and stuff down. Slow them down. You got to be careful with this stuff. It is really problematic long term.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, obviously with using ESPN as an example with this article, I think they've done a good job of reporting kind of what's happened and providing that whole story now. I think it's more the onus on those who are kind of adding fuel to the fire as this story was evolving during, that November, December, and starting to glorify it, where the issue probably stands. And and there's a comment, that's been mentioned around, like, we're wagering shows and things that are on, and I have no issue with those, and this is part of what we do as well. I think they're fantastic if you listen for long enough and you can kind of gauge where things are at. A lot of people can yell things and, say as much as you want and sound believable, but you just need to watch things for long enough to kind of formulate your own opinion. I think that's the key thing here, is that, I wouldn't walk up to someone on the street and give them my opinion. They have no idea about me or my background, and go, put $50 on this, and then that person do it, or they shouldn't do it. Some probably would. But, it's about formulating that opinion over time. And this case of Parlay Patz is an example of someone who flew very, very high and flew very close to the sun very quickly. And there are probably more elements to this in the first place that weren't picked up. And, at least in this instance, we don't have to hypothesize as to whether he would have gone down this path of, the targeted abuse, because that actually happened before he rose to that moderate level of fame, or whatever it is there is that they're referring to him as at the moment. So, I think there's a lot of areas to unpack, but I thought that this, and we both thought that this was a good place to start these conversations. And we'd love to kind of evolve this over time as well and get some people on. So like we said before, that Sharky on Sharky Waters Nation on Twitter, and Drew, so Whale Capper, and a couple of these guys to get them on it. And I think there's a lot of wisdom there, and it's not about people. We're not asking, I guess, what's your edge, to an extent. I think it's more that handling losses is probably it is the most important part of it. And I'm actually at the point now where, with my work on Twitter, I'm actually considering just reviewing losses on Twitter, and actually not even mentioning wins in any capacity. And if people then look at that and are willing to then look onto my work and look at the my record and that sort of thing, and then still make the decision to sign up, then at least they know what they're in for, in that regard. But I think it's a slippery slope, and I don't think I actually think we're only at the tip of the iceberg at the moment.
I think that we are, and that's why we want to keep talking about it. We will keep talking about it. There's two other examples. We talked about Parlay Patz. There was a lot of articles. One of the most fun stories that you can read about. This guy Robert Gorodetsky from Chicago. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to think of what you could actually Google to find this.
I'll pop the links up on my website, and maybe
I'll
on
pop
Twitter
the links
afterwards.
up and stuff. But I mean, this guy stole $10 million from somebody, telling him he was going to bet. There's another case that we have. These two guys, 74 and 72 years old, they start a sports betting fund that they get $29.5 million in some sort of Ponzi scheme. I mean, it's exhausting, and I think you're right. We're at the tip of this. I mean, this is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I can't. Part of me is almost bizarrely excited to see how weird this gets. What kind of companies get into this stuff? Like, is Goldman Sachs going to have some sort of an equity investment fund for sports betting that it turns out to be terrible? I don't know. It's really, really scary. There's a lot to talk about. And, I think, at this point, we've covered just about everything we wanted to. And we hope that what you got out of this was, and sorry if we circled back on a lot of stuff, but we meant to. We wanted to hammer a lot of these points a lot. And, we hope what you really got out of this was understanding how to look at content, and, not even just as an advertisement for ourselves, but just content to avoid. Look at stuff, understand it, think about it, try to put it together. I mean, really try to evaluate if some of this stuff makes sense, and try to remember that a lot of these places, certain outlets specifically, are doing this because they're supported by books. They're supported by people that make money by you placing wagers like this. So please, 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 please be careful. This could be a lot of fun. This can be profitable. This could be interesting. I mean, for me personally, one of the biggest things that I've realized in my life is that I enjoy solving complicated problems. And there is no more complicated problem than trying to figure out how to make money betting on sports. I mean, that's why I'm here. I mean, hopefully someday I can make a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. But the reason I keep doing this is because I love sports, and I have this sickness in my brain. Somebody has spent the entire life telling me I can't make money betting. I hate when people tell me I can't do stuff. It drives me freaking nuts,
Mhm.
Steve. And that's it. Like, my whole life now lives like I tell people, and they're like, yeah, sure, okay. And, you talk to them about things, and we'll get into specifics around, implied probability a little more and stuff like that, I think.
Yeah.
And we'll continue to have podcasts where we break down matches and do a little lighter stuff. But I think every once in a while, I don't know, Steve, maybe every other week, maybe at least once a month, we'll try to get into something a little heavier like this. But our hope is to long term try to create more content to help everybody understand a little bit more about what goes on. And, we appreciate, I'm looking at some comments here. The One Away is talking about, he appreciates us and how we talk about this with integrity. And we appreciate that too. And that's our goal. And please, 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 again, don't assume we know everything, because we don't.
We do not.
But we think that we know quite a bit. We've been doing this for a long time. We've been involved with a lot of people. We have not only experienced terrible things. Again, I have spent money on just absolutely horrible people. There's at least 2 or 3 names that if I said out loud right now, that several of my friends and people that may potentially think I'm not an idiot would think I was an idiot if I told you I spent money on them. But uh, again, it's that
Yeah.
paying for knowledge. Anything you do, whether it be time, suffering, or money, you got to pay for what you're going to learn. And we hope that we can maybe save you some of that pain, suffering, and money.
Yeah, and I think it's a really big thing, and the reason why we're doing this, like we said, we're not professing to know everything. Um, it's that we do this because the positives outweigh the negatives. That doesn't mean that we can't work on the negatives to try and make it a more positive experience. We're obviously very little fish in a very big pond slash ocean slash whatever you want to call the world at the moment in this space. But I think this stuff ties in really well with, I guess, what I was hoping to come of some of the things I wrote at the start of the year around, particularly around mental health as well. I think when we look at this space that we're in at the moment, it is very easy to forget about your mental health, and I guess looking after yourself as well. And part of the reason why, the last 6 years doing this prior to this year, I didn't have my name to it out of, my personal name to it out of not so much a fear of what will come back to it, but I think it's more that the switching to kind of put my face and name to it is, I think if there's a time to do it, it's now. And, if one positive thing can come from it, if one person can send a message and go, hey, I'm struggling with this or that, or, this is how I'm thinking, I think this has all been worthwhile. And I guess it's about now us figuring out how we can evolve this and keep people involved and informed. And, when we get to the end of this year or this decade, we can look back and go, you know what, we actually made a positive imprint on, this whole space.
Yeah, and I just talked about this not being about us pumping ourselves up, but I do really want to give you a lot of shine for what you've done in terms of not just the piece that you wrote about mental stability, but um, I think you can tell a lot when people watch this and listen to it. They can hear it in not only your tone of voice, but the fact that we're talking about this now. It's it's a serious thing. It's a serious thing to send hurtful, painful things to people. It drives people nuts, and uh, I don't know what's wrong with me or if I'm lucky or not. For some reason, that kind of stuff makes me laugh. Maybe I have too much self confidence. I don't know what it is, but I know that a
Yeah.
lot of people take that stuff really hard, and I worry. I really do. I worry about people, and I'm I check in on you every once in a while because
Mm.
you got a big following. You charge people for stuff. I know you get shit all the time, and I know our friends get shit all the time. And that's the other nice thing about this community. At the same time, there's a lot of people out there that are scary and really cause trouble. At the same time, you need friends, you need people. I mean, the reason that you and I talk to each other is because we started just talking tennis, and I think it was mostly out of frustration. I mean, a
Mm.
lot of it was starting to learn, but then we got to the point where we realized, well, you kind of feel this way, I feel this way, and we kind of share picks and maybe pile on stuff. A lot of it is you go to these groups, and it's a support group. It really is. Like,
Yeah.
I've been
Yep.
on this tennis player, and it all fell apart. It was supposed to be perfect, and that's where you go and vent. You don't go out and tag that person in a bunch of tweets and send them stuff they can see. Uh, not that you should ever say anything terrible, but if you need to, do it behind closed doors while the other person isn't around, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
Because you don't mean it. You don't.
Type
You
it in.
don't mean it. You're not that angry. You're not that upset. You don't want to fucking kill somebody. Like, relax.
And I think that's, it's type it into a Word document and then wait 12 hours. And you know what? If you still want to send it, maybe that's probably more of a reflection on yourself than anything else. But when we talk
That's
about
true. You
some
might
of
just
the,
be a terrible person.
and using the example you just had then, that if you're going to come to a position where you're going to be writing this stuff, say to Vera Lapko, who's coming back from injury and is probably trying to find confidence in her game and self-esteem as well, it's just a really, really awful space to be in. And I think what you were saying before around that conversations around support and talking to other people who are like-minded. If there is anyone listening, be it live or on replay, and you want to send a message, it doesn't have to be public on Twitter. If you just need to chat, or if you just want to kind of talk through something, by all means, send us a message, and just say hey. I think something I've learned more so in, it's more looking back in retrospect. When you're sitting there and I can use this as an example of my 2019. I think when you go to putting more time into this type of work, I think it's without these forums to discuss and chat, it's actually quite an isolating experience that you're finding yourself in. And it's a me against them type mentality when it's if you're spending long times writing and looking into things and watching matches and stuff, a lot of that is done solo and by yourself. And I think that the one thing I've found, particularly doing these periscopes and putting my face out there a bit more and doing podcasts and things, is you're putting more out there. You're communicating, and even this kind of chat back and forth about some pretty difficult content becomes quite therapeutic in a way.
It does. It's. You're right. I mean, selfishly, it's good to talk about this stuff. It reminds us a lot. And again, you reach out and you become part of the community. Again, we're just, as much as we're trying to help you guys, it's to build things so you can go out and help other people. So, hopefully you guys got a lot out of this. We'd love to hear back from you about some of your comments. You can find both of us on Twitter. We'd love to continue talking more about this, and we'll be back. We will. We'll talk about more concepts like this. We think that this kind of content is really good for the space. It is. We hope you guys get a lot out of this stuff. Understanding how to, again, the takeaways from today, understanding how to look at media and understand what you're reading, how to go through and evaluate people that you find on the internet and understand whether they know what they're doing or they're not. What are the red flags and stuff? So that's the goal. The goal is to help each other and grow, because it does. You can't do it by yourself. You got to grow up together as a group of people. So we hope you got that out of that. And if we can do anything to help you, we'd love to. Let us know.
So just let us know. So I'm on Twitter at ace_previews. Noops is at @_noops, NOOPS. Don't forget the underscore at the front, or you'll be following a stranger
There's
who
an
doesn't
@noops.
Twitter anymore.
It's some random guy. He won't give me his freaking handle. It's obnoxious.
Anyway, we'll see what we can do.
Like,
to
there could be another
out.
Noops.
Exactly. But thank you for everyone who's kind of tuned in. As I said, it's a bit of a heavier topic, but I think it's something that we do need to talk about. And as Noob said, if there is any feedback, be it positive or constructive, try it. We try and be constructive in this space as much as we can, but just let us know, and we're happy to take anything on board and try and build and evolve this as best we can. So thank you very much for tuning in, be it live or on replay, and we will be talking to you soon.
Ta ta.